welcome back from morning tea. It is my pleasure to introduce the chairperson for this session, Chris Todd, for our 6th keynote address. Thank you.
I'm Chris Todd. I'm one of the cataloguing team leaders at the National Library, and it's my great pleasure to welcome our next keynote speaker, Karen Coyle. Karen has been a systems developer for library catalogues, as well as a commentator on issues such as copyright and privacy. She's been involved in standards development from MARC to OpenURL to the EPUB format. Karen is currently focusing on how we can transform library metadata into a modern data format, and is involved in the development of library data for the semantic web. She was a member of the World Wide Web's Consortium's Library Linked Data Incubator Group, and she will explain the significance of this and other efforts to make libraries more visible in the global information network that is the web. Now, there may be some time for questions at the end of the presentation, but if not, Karen is here for the rest of the conference, and she will be happy to talk to people individually.
Very much so.
Thank you. I'd like to welcome Karen.
Thank you very much. I want to begin by saying that you will notice that the title of my talk is a bit different to what was in the program. When you're asked to speak, you're often asked to speak 6 or 8 months ahead of time, and then they ask you what it is you're going to speak on, which you usually don't know at that time. And I have taken the approach that once I get up on the stage, no one is going to yank me off. And so I have taken the liberty of making a bit of an adjustment to this talk, because rather than talking about the technology itself, what I want to talk about is something which is actually more difficult than the technology, which is how we find the motivation to have a technological change. This is my first trip to New Zealand. This is a line that moves from my house to your house. There's nothing in between us. It's amazing we haven't visited each other before. It is a long distance. Something significant about it, which doesn't show really very clearly on this particular slide, is that we have something in common, and that is that we are both sitting on the edges of the Pacific tectonic plate. And I was reminded of that last week when we had a series of small earthquakes centered about a mile from my house in Berkeley. And I spent the day running around re-straightening all of the pictures on my walls. We watched carefully with Christchurch and with Japan, because we share this exciting aspect of our planet. I want to start out by talking about a big picture, and this is, of course, the big picture that I see. It may be different to the big picture you see. That's what makes life interesting. The big picture of the world that we live in, because libraries exist within the context of a world that we have not really created, but that we have to respond to. And so I'm going to do a quick environment scan. I don't think any of this will be surprising to anyone. So let me start by saying that obviously today's world is highly computerized. Almost everything we do goes across computers and across devices. We are very device dependent for our communication, for our learning, and for just about everything that we do. It's also highly interactive. Every person who is on Facebook has created a Facebook page. It may be very creative, it may be very minimal. But people expect to be actors in this environment. They expect to be able to make comments, for example, on news stories in major newspapers. And as a matter of fact, if Moses were to come down from the mountain today with the tablets and the 10 Commandments, he would be expected to have comments enabled. And he would receive comments. There would be rival rival commandments being issued, and for sure someone would come up with a set of 11 commandments just to push the edge. So this is the world we live in. You can't get away with doing anything without expecting user interaction. It's also a strangely pluralistic world. We still have the powers that be, the governments, the major media outlets, but we have things like WikiLeaks that can absolutely throw off the entire world balance of power, even though they're a very informal and small organization. We have bloggers who can have an impact that it rivals that of the major news networks. Our resources today are either digital or being digitized. I don't think we're going to see an end to print, but it is quite obvious, if you know any teenagers, that print is no longer the modern medium. I see print as becoming something that is special in the same way that, for example, going to a live music concert is special. We have mediated our interaction with music through CDs and records and radio and our iPods, but we still do go to live music concerts, and we go to live music concerts, though, as something a little bit special. I suspect that for the significant future, that we will still see all wedding invitations printed up on nice paper, nice embossed paper. That is one of those things that will not go away, while increasingly what we read as books and all of that will be digital. Interesting thing that I find about digital materials is that they are relatively easy to find and obtain. You do a search online, the digital material is right there, pops up on your screen, but they aren't easy to use. They require software, they require devices, they require certain skills. And I have to say that the software and devices that help us read and annotate, etc., seem to me to still be very crude, not very well developed. So, libraries end up having to help users with this because the infrastructure around actually using digital materials seems to be quite poor in my mind. Today's users expect to work independently and without prior instruction. They don't expect to have to attend a one-hour class in order to use any materials. They are enamored of the single search box in which they can put anything and get something back. But they're dependent on software and tools that are not controlled by the library. And I've heard a lot of talk here at this conference about how the library is finding itself having to be the mediator between the user and these tools, even though the library really has no control over those tools. Access often means obtaining a copy, and what that means is every time a user does something like accesses a PDF, they have a copy on their hard drive, and I don't know what your hard drive looks like. Mine is a mess. That users are actually having to try to manage whole libraries of their own, or they're simply ending up with a download file filled with stuff that they have no idea what it is. And we don't have, again, good means for helping people manage that. Communication is increasingly remote. It's not face-to-face. It's faster. The academics talk about the slow conversation of books. You know, that someone writes a book and 5–10 years later, someone else writes a book that responds to that book. And even journal articles, it's years in the making. And this is the world that academics live in. This is their idea of a conversation. Whereas if you watch a 13-year-old, their idea of a conversation takes place in about 20 seconds. And, you know, maybe 10 to 50. I mean, a tweet would be long for some people in our environment today. There is, I see an interesting rise in new media over old. It used to be when you went to buy software, you got a box, it had diskettes in it, and it had this thing that was like a trade paperback, and it was this thick, and those were the instructions. If you want to find out how to use software today, most likely you're going to go to the website of that company, and you're going to be given video training. That a lot of it isn't in text, but is in the form of new media. Many of our activities that used to be ethereal, that used to be temporary, including something like this, which is being recorded, are now becoming part of the record. Every Facebook page is part of the record. Facebook has now started looking at people's pages as a timeline that represents their life. And this is all recorded, and if you've looked on Facebook, I mean, the idea that all of those conversations that you had at age 12 or 13 or 14 would be recorded forever is rather frightening. But for the kids today, they're going to have a record of something which it just went out into the ether. So conference lectures, talks, all of that type of thing, not to mention it seems to me there's a video cam on every single cat in the world and it all gets uploaded. You know, we didn't all used to get to see that. And then communication that used to be informal, you know, chatting, that type of thing, again, is now becoming permanent and fixed. I find it interesting that the courts today, you often use email as evidence. And who would have thought that email would have become something so accepted as a truth that it would become part of a court case. Of course, Ollie North found that out in our world a while back. But, you know, we often think of email as being, hey, do you want to go to lunch? And in fact, it is becoming part of the permanent record. So in fact, we have pretty much lost our ability to be off the record in a way that we once were. So essentially, our world is digital, it's interactive, it's happening online. Information is both informal and permanent at the same time, and the use of text is waning. And then the question is, what are libraries doing about this? And since my area of interest is in tech services, not only tech services, but catalog and database development, there are two things that I'm looking at that to me are real happenings in this area. And the first is the thing I call the FRAMLY, Ferber, Frad, Forsad, the functional requirements models that are being developed to try to bring the concept of library data into a more modern format and one that is more manipulable by computers. And the other movement is linked data, which is a kind of knowledge organization and data organization that is being designed for the web, where data is both on the web and of the web. And I consider this definitely a new context for library data. And hopefully, remind me if I don't tell you, but we have some breaking news in that area. So I think that this 2011 is going to be known 5, 10, 15 years from now as being the year of linked data. This is the year that this concept of linked data became considered mainstream in the library environment. Now, you may not have heard a great deal about it, so I'm going to give a very, very brief introduction to linked data. Tim Berners-Lee, or Sir Tim, as he is known as, developed the World Wide Web as a way to share documents among scientists. And again, this was this slow conversation of published text becoming a little bit faster, so that documents could be put on the internet. So the web didn't exist, it was the internet. Documents could be put on the internet and could be linked to each other. That's the internet we have today, even though our internet is much more dynamic. Many of the pages, you know, have sound and pictures, and they're brought together in a bunch of chunks for something that displays on the screen, not so boring as physics papers that Tim was working in. About 12 years ago, he came up with another idea, which was the semantic web. And what the semantic web is, it's very similar to the web. But instead of documents on the web, it's a way to put data on the web, to actually put data out there and to allow it to link. The data can be within documents or it can be on its own. And this is why when you talk about the semantic web and then people start to talk about linked data is the data that is on the semantic web. Linked data is actually a very simple concept. The technology, it can be complex, but conceptually it's this. You have bits of data, you have a bit of data, and that bit of data can link to another bit of data, and that bit of data links to yet another bit of data, and then you have a web of data. And it obviously makes a little more sense when I put in some content, but there's no reason why library data can't be this linked data. So we can say that we have an author, we have a person who's the author of a book. And the significant thing about linked data is the links aren't just link. When you have a link between documents on the web, you don't really know what the link means. In linked data, the link itself has meaning. So the link says, it doesn't just link Herman Melville to Moby Dick, it actually says he's the author. And this could allow for a very, very rich user discovery environment. In addition, anyone else can link to you. And I think this frightens people a bit, but if I put a document up on the web and other people link to it, they have done no damage, they haven't changed my document at all. If I put my data up on the web, others can link to my data. My data is still intact. But this linking is what will lead us to knowledge creation. That data going out there on the web can be linked by other data. And we can actually develop new concepts, new connections. Linked data is used by hundreds of communities today. If you go to linkedata.org, there is an attempt to try to create a visualization of what we have out there in linked data. This is about a year old because it's hard to keep up with this. There's so much new coming out. This is what is called the linked data cloud. In one conference I was at, almost every speaker who spoke, because the conference was about linked data, showed the cloud, so we decided that the cloud would be a drinking game, and that every time that the cloud appeared, everyone would take a drink. So I think that we need to hold one of these meetings in a bar one time and really get the benefit of that. The different colors show different communities that have their data out there, and just to give you a bit of an idea, every circle is a set of data that has been made available in a standard format defined by the semantic web and is out there on the web. And there are major organizations like the BBC and the New York Times whose data is out there. And as a matter of fact, if you go to the BBC web pages, their web pages are created in many cases by pulling in information through linked data from other sources. So they can pull in descriptions from Wikipedia, they pull in images from scientific databases, they pull in statistics, they pull in quite a bit of information. New York Times, you can essentially access the New York Times data using linked data technology. There's a lot of scientists are very interested in getting their data out there, so there are a lot of scientific data sets that are being put out there in linked data, because one of the things, in particular in science, is that everyone works in such a narrow little environment that, but they know that their data probably has some way that it connects up with somebody else's data, and so by putting their data out there, they can actually explore and discover connections that they didn't know about, because these groups all tend to be, so very, siloed in their work. Government bodies and NGOs. You may know that there is a big effort in the UK and in the EU to get more government data out and available for people to use for analysis and exploration. And many of them are focusing on getting their data out there in this linked data format, so that all of these, the different agencies, and I don't know about your government, but my government, agencies hardly even know of each other's existence, much less what they're doing, but so that the data from different agencies can be brought together. And there are actually some very interesting sites where you can see people doing things like mapping. They actually did a map of the closure of the libraries in the UK, which was rather sad, but it was an interesting experiment in linked data. There is some library data out there. There isn't enough to say that we could have a complete picture of what libraries are, but there is library data starting to appear in the cloud. Something that I think is particularly significant is that the World Wide Web Consortium, CERTIM's organization, the ones who develop the web, in particular develop standards and develop new ways of providing data on the web, actually the World Wide Web Consortium itself developed a working group to look at the possibilities of getting more library data onto the web. There is such an interest in our data because our data is the foundation for any research. And without having library data out there, you have all of these documents and articles and references that have no place to go. So people have actually come to us and begged us to get our information out there on the web. This working group just completed its work. It has a report out with recommendations for what some of the first steps should be, and I'll give you links and all later. This is my 5 steps to library linked data. I could go into more of this in sort of more technical detail. I don't think that's appropriate right now, but if anyone wants to talk about this, I'm happy to. What I'd like you to look at, though, is the very last point, and it is extremely important, that no one can use your data unless you put it out for open access, no restrictions for anyone to use however they would like. This web of data only functions when people can freely make use of information that they find, the same way that you can freely link to anything that you see on the World Wide Web. Some organizations have a hard time with this, and there are some movements. The JISC in the UK did an entire report on what the pros and cons are of openness and helping libraries and institutions understand how they can open their data. There is a open data movement taking place in Europe that encourages, we have some principles for open bibliographic data stating that bibliographic data should not be considered proprietary. It needs to be open. So there is this has actually become a movement of trying to get bibliographic data out there and usable. To let you know what library data does exist already in this linked data format, and it does have to follow a certain standard of data structure. There are a number of subject thesauri. Library of Congress has made the Library of Congress subject headings available. Bibliothèque Nationale has made their subject headings called Rameau. Because this is linked data, they've been able to link the two. So you can start with LC and find the Rameau heading, start at Rameau and find the LC heading, and we're hoping that more of these thesauri will be developed and that we will have all of the links between them. There is a version of Dewey online, although it's just the summary because Dewey is proprietary. And the Library of Congress has said that they are working on getting the Library of Congress classification available online in this linked data format. There is some work getting MARC data, mainly all of the code lists in MARC, out in that format. There isn't really yet a version of MARC itself in linked data format. When RDA, before it actually came out officially, a group of folks who'd worked on the semantic web contacted the JSC and said, we would like to help you create a version of RDA in this standard, in this semantic web standard, and that does exist. It has happened. All of the RDA elements, all 1,300 and something of them, are out there, and all of the RDA controlled vocabularies. We do not yet have an application that uses this. We don't have a way yet to go out and create an RDA record or to catalog an RDA, but what you would need to create that application and to create it in a semantic web way does exist. It's out there. It's been out there for about a year. And I think that if we could create an RDA light, because RDA heavy is very big, that we would find that some, we're looking for that 18-year-old with spare time in his basement to work on some of the first applications using this data. But it isn't rocket science. I mean, the ability to do it is there. IFLA is embracing this, and FRBR and FRAD have been expressed and registered in this format, as has ISBD. FRSAD hasn't yet because it's not complete. In a way, doing ISBD was a way to experiment with, can you take legacy formats and express them in this new data format? And the answer seems to be yes. We have the Virtual International Authority file that is being done at OCLC, but it's not really an OCLC project. It's a project of national libraries who are contributing their authority files. The name records are being merged so that you have one entry for each person, and you can access this either by exporting MARC or you can access it in a linked data format. At least in the English Wikipedia, which I haven't been able to get to because whenever I type in Wikipedia, it takes me to the New Zealand one. In the English Wikipedia, if you look up a person, a well-known person, and you look down at the bottom of the page, you may see VIAF : and then a number. And that is the link between Wikipedia and the merged International Library Authority file. So we are beginning to, and in VIAF, you will also find the link back to Wikipedia. So we are beginning to be linked with that web environment of information, and people will be able to move from that, presumably, to those authors in library catalogs. We have treated library data up until now as if it's a closed system. If we needed to talk about geography, we talked about geography as if it only happened in library data. If we talked about dates, we talked about them as if they only happened in library data. In fact, there are a lot of things, almost everything in library data is also used by others. And so one of the points of linked data is to embrace things like geographic names on a global scale so that the library data and other people using geographic data is using the same thing. So there is a lot of related metadata that libraries could either interact with or even adopt. The academic world is very interested in getting open access to citation data and the kinds of things that they find in proprietary abstract and indexing databases, which annoys them because they have trouble getting a hold of it. So there are a number of different citation data formats. We all talk about people. There's this thing called friend of a friend, which has been used for social networking. You can export data from Facebook in this friend of a friend format. And we could connect those friends with things like VIAF if they are the same person. There's geographic data, and then there's data in microformats that would be data that is actually inside web documents, but that is data and can link out to other data. So we could get authors' names embedded into web documents. So what are some of the, besides what I've said so far, some of the advantages of linked data? And those of us who've spent time trying to process MARC records and trying to get MARC records into databases and get them indexed, and those of us who spent years and years on the MARC Standards Committee painfully trying to add a single new code to a MARC record, which by the time it got there sometimes was too late. The code for LaserDisc, it took 2.5 years to get the code for LaserDisc from the proposal